All right, so we can go ahead and get started. I would just like to start off by saying hello and welcome to part two of the Roundtable mini-series, Win-Win-Win with IT Service Desk and Remote Monitoring Management. Before we start, I'd just like to remind everyone that they are on mute and their video is off. But if you would like to ask a question, please use the chat feature to our panelists and we'll get your questions answered. This roundtable is being recorded and the recording will be sent out as well as listed on our YouTube channel. To get started, I'd first like to introduce our panelists. And first we have Matt Briggs, Director of New Business Development. We have Chuck Arico, our Executive Vice President, and we have James Melchor, our CTO. All right, and I will now hand it over to you guys.
All right, thanks, Jordan. And like Jordan said, we appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedule to join us for another fast-paced, hard-hitting roundtable. We love these sessions. They run for 30 minutes or less, and so let's get down to business. So, as Jordan mentioned, Chuck and James are going to be on the hot seat today, and feel free to ping Jordan anytime with questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. So, in regard to the content, we want to hit on managed services and IT support. As I'd mentioned in our last roundtable, we've seen a significant uptick in demand for end user support and remote monitoring and management of network devices, servers, and systems. And again, the catalysts are increasing complexity of IT environments, creating skills gaps. Internal resources simply don't have enough time to be both strategic and take care of the day-to-day tactical tasks, and then I would say broader acceptance of outsourcing models just in general. So let's dive in, Chuck, James, if you guys are ready. So Chuck, for you first, can you briefly for the attendees define shared services, dedicated support services, and the hybrid model? And maybe we can talk about a few different use cases.
Sure. So the simplest way to define that is there are certain IT contracts that justify having a managed service provider like DYOPATH to dedicate full-time resources to a client account because the demand and the activity can justify it. And so they're exclusively 100% focused on one client. A managed service environment is one where we're leveraging a pool of qualified technical resources to support multiple clients based on the size and the complexity of their organizations. And they may support multiple clients, so it's a one-to-many type relationship from that standpoint. A hybrid environment is where we actually have dedicated and shared resources on certain accounts. So a good example from a use case standpoint is that there is a very large, say, electric utility that DYOPATH supports, where we have DYOPATH employees that report on site every day to the client, and their sole job in life is to support that one client. They also, as an extension of that team, reach back to shared services within the DYOPATH NOC and SOC and service desk, where they can also provide support to that electric utility, but they're also providing support to other clients as well. And so it really depends on the size of the customer, how many end users they have, and the complexity of their environment. And having that flexibility from a dedicated to a hybrid to a shared can be very, very beneficial to the customer.
Thanks, Chuck. James, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I mean, and really, I mean, the reasons for, I would say, shared, hybrid, and dedicated are to kind of also align with what we would consider kind of the maturity of a client or growth strategy of a client, right? So as we look at certain clients, we might bring them in as shared, but their business goals and their business goals will really drive them to start moving into kind of different areas. So complexity, compliance, regulatory compliance, those type of things come into play. And when those start to come into play, it really starts to test traditional managed service models. So that's where you really start getting into, shared with hybrid support. And in some instances, we break out the services to provide dedicated for very, niche areas. And then still maintain, hybrid and shared services for the rest of that for that client. So, strategically, that's the way we like to have it, is having shared, hybrid, and dedicated. That way, as the client grows and complexity of the client grows, DIOPATH can grow with them as well.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I'll add a couple points. We find ourselves from time to time engaging with our valued clients with the shared services model. And as we advance our clients through the IT operations maturity model, there may be a shift, right, in how we're supporting our clients. We might, to James and Chuck's point, migrate to hybrid because the business requires and dictates that. Or even move to more of a full-blown dedicated model as a client reaches maturity. And we'll just give you one more example. Chuck talked about an electric company. We've got other organizations that might use shared services for end user support and for the blocking, day-to-day blocking and tackling of network devices, systems, and servers. But they may need a dedicated AWS resource. They may need a dedicated security resource. And so we see that as an increasing trend as complexities increase in our clients' environments. So good stuff, good conversation, guys. Thanks for that. So James, this one is to you. How do we collaborate with internal members of a client's IT operations team to make them more productive and efficient? Because if we'll rewind to the first roundtable, we're not here to replace anyone. We're here to collaborate and elevate internal resources and make them more strategic. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and Matt, really, I mean, that also goes back to overall IT maturity model, right? That we'll probably reference quite a bit through this roundtable. So when we're looking at where a client resides and from an IT maturity perspective, that also helps us guide what we need to be focusing on. What do we need to focus on jointly with the internal IT teams? Looking at what we can do to really bring efficiencies within IT, and a lot of the times we look at them as an extension of us, and vice versa as well, right? So we start looking at the tasks and things that need to be done, looking at the projects, looking at the overall service itself, and we start to take on those things that it's better suited for us to handle, and actually what that does is just elevate the IT staff to be able to focus on those really big business initiatives that they were not able to, when they didn't have a managed services provider, or maybe they just didn't have the support needed or skill sets there. So it's extremely collaborative, right, from that perspective. But really, it's just identifying where the client's needs are, what do they need to do, and really what the objectives of IT is, and then aligning to that, and then driving those efficiencies.
Yeah, thanks, James. And Chuck, love to get your thoughts on how we collaborate with internal resources.
Yeah, I agree with everything that James said. I guess the only other addition that I would add is that I always like to ask the client, what business are you in? Do you want to be in the IT business, or do you want to be in the business that you're in that makes you money, it makes drives revenue? And that's a key question, because if you want to be in the IT business and you're going to have your own internal IT staff, then that's a whole different set of complexities that you need to make sure you have across the entire enterprise to properly support it. If you're going to be more in a managed services model with somebody like DYOPATH, we always want to make sure that the internal IT staff, as James referenced, are focused on more of the application environment, more on the business initiatives, and making sure that those end users basically can perform their job in the most optimal manner, and focusing on those business value activities as opposed to just keeping the lights on. So how do we collaborate with them? We help educate them. We help train them on how they can move up in their own organization to focus on those activities that I just described.
Right. And I think, in doing this for 25 years now, we mentioned being built for IT outsourcing. And so we have methodologies, playbooks, processes, procedures, policies that, our clients instantly tap into that I think, accelerate the maturity model right out of the gate, because a lot of organizations, internal resources have had to, sort of grow those things organically, and it takes time, it takes investments that, time and money may not have been available. So I think, there's some immediate impact that we can have, and then, obviously tying in with ITIL and our strategic transition support plan, again, which we touched on last go around, are classic examples of how we want to work side by side with the internal folks. Okay, so Chuck, can you talk us through how we help our clients continuously improve their IT support model?
Absolutely. So at a high level, we have a 3-step model that we use called our strategic support plan. And basically what that does is it first focuses on the business environment and what are the key business drivers for our client's organization. What are the main value streams? How do they make money? Once we understand that, we then try and understand what are the key functions that are involved in those value streams. So you have accounting, you have sales, you have HR, et cetera, et cetera. Once we've identified those, we then look at what are the key processes that support those functions. So how do you have a quote to cash process across those functions? Once we understand those functions, we can, those processes, we can then look to see, okay, now we know the applications that support those processes. And once we understand those applications, we can then position the IT infrastructure to support that application environment. We go through that on an annual basis with our clients to make sure that not only is their IT infrastructure properly positioned based on their application environment, but once we understand their infrastructure and how to properly design it, we create the support model. And what does that support model look like from an organizational standpoint, from a process standpoint, and most importantly, from a continuous improvement standpoint. And so it's a continuous improvement cycle where we review it and go through those 3 steps I just described on an annual basis.
Thanks, Chuck. And then James, as our Chief Technology Officer, you're certainly in the trenches with our valued clients. Can you maybe cite an example or two of how we've helped organizations continuously improve? I know I have a couple that are coming to mind, but love to hear from you on it.
Yeah, and I'll use the example of like IT maturity, right? So to add on to what Chuck said, that the process that he outlined is, how we look at things, how do we assess them, how do we build the right service for them, definitely. And then that continuous improvement process really is aligning a client to a certain maturity level. And then there's factors that come into play like, QBRs, those type of things, is looking at, where the client resides. So it's really building, I would say, like a maturity model roadmap for the client, and then assessing it from a quarterly basis as well. And looking at, what do we need to achieve? Where does the client need to go? And some of those initiatives that come out of there, I would say they're quick hit. There's things that could be done from a quarterly basis, annual basis, could be 2 to 3 years out. There's a lot of different factors to that based on, budget requirements, compliance, again, things that are coming down the pipe, or even, long-term initiatives like a client might have to be, SOC 2 compliant or something along those lines, right? So those are longer term initiatives for some clients. So really it's building that maturity model roadmap and looking at the things the way that Chuck stated, kind of assessing it from the business needs perspective, technical, and then putting in the right support plan, and then measuring that, right, as well, and constantly measuring that, right? So
Yeah, and thanks, James. Go ahead.
So I just want to add to that. Yeah, a good use case of what James is saying, very, very simple, but it saved the customer several $1,000s a month, was connectivity. We had a client that when we came in and we performed our assessment, we realized you're paying way too much for your connectivity costs. And so with a few phone calls, a simple design, redesign, we saved them several $1,000s a month. So something as simple as that to even more complex areas that James talked about
yeah.
are good examples of that.
Yeah, and I can add to that one, Matt, from a use case also perspective is, you know, a lot of clients, they look at IT differently, right? So sometimes, you know, we're walking through the roadmap and we're stating, hey, these are the things that need to occur in the event of something happening, right? It could be a natural disaster, it could be, you know, weather event or some things. So we had clients that we've walked through that maturity model on a roadmap perspective and got them to a certain spot, and then an event like, you know, COVID occurs, or even, you know, here in Houston, you know, Harvey, and they are able to remotely work, right? If we would have stuck to the path that they were at, they would have been stranded. You know, their users wouldn't have been able to work and things like that. So it's really just moving them through that maturity model. And in that instance, it was enabling a remote workforce prior to events like this happening, and not shutting down their business.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, guys. And I've got one that's kind of top of mind. It happened last week, and it's a relatively new client of ours. It's using us for service desk and for remote monitoring and management. And the CFO of the organization logged a ticket. There was some application performance challenges that he was having to close out month end. And for those of you that don't know, every ticket that's open, we create a client satisfaction survey. You know, typically it's a quick hit, 5 questions, rate us 1 through 5 in different areas: timeliness, professionalism, knowledge. And so we got very positive scores, 4 5s and 1 4. But we also allow our clients on those surveys to provide us with immediate feedback. And the feedback we got from the CFO was, you know, hey, we think there should be some application performance monitoring enabled that will alert on these things. And as we dug in, because we dig in on every ticket, it was more of an architectural problem, right? And how things were constructed, we'll say. And so that allowed our team to go back and say there's a different way to architect the environment to provide better performance for the applications without getting into a long, drawn-out, boring discussion on the technical front. But that's an example of how we can immediately affect change, and it's as simple as just getting some instant feedback. Okay, so thanks for that, guys. So, you know, we've talked about a lot. James, this one for you, going in and having a client offload the tactical, the mundane, the day-to-day, kind of keeping the lights on tasks. So once we've established trust and proved our worth and value in doing that, what are our next steps in elevating the partnership? We talk about the waterline, and the tactical stuff sits below that, but how do we move north of that waterline once we've kind of stabilized things?
Yeah, so once we, to me, I would almost want to say that's kind of like where the analytics piece starts to come into play. Is so once we've stabilized things and we're starting to look at the data that comes in, you know, really what we're looking at then from that perspective is, you know, what efficiencies can be gained, what can we be doing differently? You know, to your point about the architecture piece, right? That's also one of the perfect times, right? Where we start to look at, okay, we're getting X amount of alerts, we're getting X amount of events. and reviewing those with a technical, account manager and clients, and really start looking at, okay, what could we be doing differently? Is this the right solution for that particular client? And then taking a step back and saying, okay, knowing where the client wants to go in the next year or two, what should we be doing? So now it really starts to change the conversation from we're just looking at tickets, we're just resolving issues, to okay, let's start looking at the architecture, the platform. Let's look at your business strategy and understand what we need to change or morph to really meet that. And then now we're starting to work on those type of initiatives with the client, as well as taking care of those items below the waterline.
Hey, Chuck, I'm going to ask you a different question. We'll move on from that one. Can you discuss the role that our technical account managers play and why it's important? Because from our perspective, having a TAM, a technical account manager, engaged with our clients is critical to moving the needle.
Absolutely. So the technical account manager really plays almost two dual roles. One is being that one single point of contact from a commercial standpoint, not from a delivery service desk standpoint, but from a commercial standpoint, representing DYOPATH and making sure that the client needs are properly understood and then properly communicated back to our technical teams within the company to ensure that we're delivering on the areas that the client is requesting. The benefit and the beauty of a technical account manager is that they have both very technical skills, but they also have very good communication and project management skills. So they can articulate, they can understand what somebody is saying from a business perspective and what their needs are, and be able to translate that into a technical conversation with our staff to make sure that those technical solutions are solving the business need. The other area I would address is that it's critically important to have somebody who is providing the overall management of all projects and all requirements from a technical perspective. A lot of organizations that we come into really don't have that business analyst or that project management function. And there's so many things that can fall through the cracks if you don't have it. So having that TAM in place really ups the level of maturity that organization can achieve, and efficiencies and success in their projects.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And from my perspective, and this isn't a slight on field engineering resources or salespeople, but I seen other managed service providers, a lead is going to be a technical, a field engineer. The challenge with that is, they're typically head down, executing on deliverables, service delivery. And on the flip side, if it is, an account manager, occasionally if that account manager is not overly technical, then it's kind of hard to bridge the gap between, the needs of the business and the IT operations and how that's going to support the business moving forward. So it's this missing link or linchpin that, from our standpoint, adds a tremendous amount of value as we partner with our clients. So thanks for that. So James, you and I love to talk about this. One of the challenges of IT operations is just keeping current with documentation, diagrams, institutional knowledge. Things move at breakneck speed, especially as organizations go through digital transformation. So what's our approach to solve this problem, and why is it important, right? Especially when IT support is outsourced.
Yeah, and I'll say that's a key component of why we're an ITIL aligned a managed services provider, right? It's not just from a service desk perspective, it's from an overall operations perspective. So because of that, you're touching on those key things. So being ITIL aligned is about, one, documenting the services, right, that we're providing, the processes, the procedures, and documentation is a critical piece of that, because documentation is how we're going to be able to support those clients. So if we don't have the proper documentation in place, right, and we leave that piece out, or we're not ITIL aligned, that's critical, right? That's a detriment to the service. The diagrams as well, those are constant things that have to be updated as part of the service. So there's numerous things that could change within the organization. So it's not just about handling tickets and resolving issues, but it's also with keeping up to date on the documentation, making sure that we are up to date on any of the diagrams, any of the institutional knowledge, right? So there's a change management component with that. There's a knowledge base component where we're capturing all that data, we're storing that data, and we're providing that to the analysts and engineers to be able to, one, when they work on an issue for a particular client, they have all the right documentation, they have all the right diagrams, they know that they're being updated, they have all the institutional knowledge from the knowledge base articles that are there as well. And they have the ability really to support the clients better because of that, and because we're ITIL aligned from an operational perspective.
Hey, Matt,
Right.
can I just chime in on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think also too, what's critically important, people often think documentation of, diagrams, charts, etc. But the standard operating procedures are absolutely critical. So especially from a DR or a continuity of operations perspective, in the event an issue happens, if you've got clearly documented standard operating procedures, escalation procedures during an event or during a crisis, that can mean the difference between how well you recover or how well you don't recover. So also think very, very intently about SOPs when you're thinking of documentation.
Yeah, great point, Chuck. And I'll make one comment, but I'll put a plug in first. Please, if you have any questions, we'll probably have about a minute left to address a question or two. So let Jordan know if there's something that's on your mind. From my standpoint, if you have updated institutional knowledge that's internal or with third parties, there's that whole continuity of support, right? If somebody's out of the office temporarily or for a longer period of time, you don't have that blip on the radar from a support standpoint. And we see a lot of organizations that outsource, IT support and don't have that institutional knowledge, and then all of a sudden they're hamstrung, they're held hostage by a provider because they don't have that information, right, to and confidence to make a move. So another important point. So we are almost out of time here. So that ends the Q&A portion for Chuck and James. And so Jordan, any questions from the attendees?
We do. We actually have some really good questions. I don't think you'll be able to, there's 4 or 5. I don't think you'll be able to answer all of them, but the first one, I guess we can go over the question is, are the same resources doing both RMM and service desk?
Great question. Chuck, James, you guys first.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead. So no, so from an RMM perspective, service desk is a different skill set and set of resources than what your traditional engineering would be from an engineering NOC perspective. Two different resources sit very close to each other and provide warm handoffs to engineering from service desk.
Yeah, Chuck, any final thoughts on that one?
No, agree. Next question.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, Jordan, I know I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. I think we're right at 11 Central. So I think what we'll do here is we'll list out the questions that were submitted that we weren't able to get to. We'll address them in email to the group. and we'll send out a recording because we are over. So Jordan, back over to you. Thanks everyone for participating.
Exactly. Thank you, Matt. Yep. I'd like to thank everybody for joining today, and we will be sending out a recording as well as the follow-up questions for this roundtable. And if you are interested in part 3 of this roundtable mini-series, you'll be able to find that information on our events page on dyopath.com. Please email us if you have any other additional questions, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone.